Hello, and welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham-Bentwaters UFO incident, John Burroughs, and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. And now, leading off the program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
On December 26, 1980, after midnight, strange red, blue, orange, and white lights were moving rapidly through the thick, tall Rendlesham forest that ran along then NATO's largest airbase, RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, near Woodbridge, England, 95 miles northeast of London. Running after those lights were U.S. Air Force Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston and Airman First Class John Burroughs. The colorful lights apparently had a destination, because when the two men reached the edge of the forest near an open field called Capel Green, there was an explosion of bright white light. Afterwards, Staff Sergeant Penniston saw a 7-foot by 9-foot black triangular craft seemingly suspended on white light a few feet above the forest floor. Later, tripod marks embedded in the soil would be discovered. Sergeant Penniston did not see Airman John Burroughs, and the only memory John has is the bright white light, without any recall of what happened next. Central Security Control tried over 45 minutes to radio the security team in the forest, but no response. 45 minutes of strangely blocked radio transmissions. 45 minutes of missing time for John Burroughs. 45 minutes of Sergeant Penniston walking around the astounding black triangle, dragging his fingers over its dark glassy surface. When Sergeant Penniston touched symbols raised up from the black surface, his mind was suddenly filled with zeros and ones of binary code and telepathic impressions of a time machine from a distant future where an advanced civilization was dying out. Its mission was to harvest genetic material from Earth to use as Band-Aids to extend the future civilization's survival. There was no pilot. The triangular drone operated with alien self-activating software. Sergeant Penniston also saw in his mind's eye a long stream of zeros and ones that would not fade for the next day and a half until he finally wrote the numbers down at the back of a notebook. He never showed John Burroughs or anyone else those zeros and ones until October 2010, when we were in TV production with Ancient Aliens in Phoenix, Arizona. Since then, binary code translations of the numbers say this, quote, exploration of humanity, followed by the number 8100, that has been interpreted as the origin year from which the black triangle came. Then a latitude and longitude number with no designated decimal points that two scientists placed at the town center of Woodbridge. The Ancient Aliens analyst interpreted the latitude-longitude to be west of Ireland in the Atlantic Ocean's mythological area known as High Brazil, a phantom island that allegedly appeared and disappeared. Then next were these words, quote, continuous for planetary advance, fourth coordinate, continuous before, close quote. Other binary information included 6 latitudes and longitudes around the world in Caracol, Belize, Sedona, Arizona, the Giza Pyramid in Cairo, Egypt, the Nazca Lines of Peru, Taishan-Q, China, and the portal at the Temple of Apollo in Nachos, Greece. Finally were these words, eyes of your eyes, and then a repeat of the controversial latitude-longitude with the word origin, followed by origin year 8100. Exactly 5 years later, on the night of December 26, 1985, inside another forest at Accord, New York, 95 miles north of Manhattan, renowned author Whitley Strieber, acclaimed in 1978 and 1981 for his first two books, The Moulton and The Hunger. He was checking his alarm system of the cabin house where he, his wife Anne, and son Andrew lived when they weren't in their Manhattan apartment. All seemed normal, and Whitley went to bed. But before sleep, he heard whooshing sounds from downstairs, and then a small 3-foot figure with dark eyes pushed open the bedroom door. What happened next became Whitley's third world-famous book, Communion, released in 1987, 2 years after the highly strange phenomenon intruded into the Striebers' lives, as the lights and black triangle intruded in Rendlesham Forest. In Communion, Whitley wrote, quote, "The next thing I knew, the figure came rushing into the room. I recall only blackness after that, for an unknown period of time," close quote. Since then, Whitley Strieber has written 33 more books, and his latest, released in January 2016, is The Supernatural, a new vision of the unexplained, written with philosophy and religion scholar Jeffrey Kripal, former chair of the Department of Religious Studies at Rice University in Houston, Texas. After this short break, Whitley Strieber joins us on Phenomenon Radio to tell us more about the small figure that rushed him on December 26, 1985, what Whitley has learned about alien intelligences over the past 31 years, and his perspective about the Rendlesham Forest mystery.
Thank you, Linda. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live right here on KGRA-DB for tonight's special guest interview with Whitley Strieber. He will join us right after these messages. Stay with us.
At MSC Cruises, we believe life should be measured in moments, not minutes. The moment you set eyes on the perfect blue of the Caribbean, the moment you breathe in the sweet, salty air of freedom, the moment you let out the sound of true happiness. Find your moments aboard one of the newest members of our fleet. Introducing MSC Divina, now sailing the Caribbean year-round from Miami. Contact your travel advisor or visit msccruises.com today.
Call Holiday Maker Travel toll-free at 877-642-4308. Check out their website at holidaymakertravel.com or email them at info@holidaymakertravel.com to reserve your MSC cruise today.
Around the world for decades have come high strangeness reports of mysterious aerial lights, beams, animal mutilations, human abductions, secret space and military programs focused on an alien presence. One reporter of these Earth mysteries is Emmy Award-winning TV producer, writer, and editor Linda Moulton Howe. She reports and edits the science, environment, and real X-Files news website, Earthfiles.com.
We are moving from the paradigm that we are alone in the universe to a new one in which we are not alone. And something out there is interacting with us, our animals and plant life, forcing glimpses of other realities upon us.
Linda has produced 4 large books about these phenomena with hundreds of color images and illustrations that reviewers such as New York Times best-selling author Jim Marrs describes as an amazing accumulation of evidence. All her books, An Alien Harvest, the 2-volume Glimpses of Other Realities, and Mysterious Lights and Crop Circles, along with documentaries, are available in the shop at Earthfiles.com.
Your best source for live UFO paranormal talk radio. KGRAradio.com.
Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio. You're listening to John Burroughs and Linda Moulton Howe. It's time to kick off tonight's interview with very special guest, Whitley Strieber. Here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Race, and welcome to Phenomenon Radio, Whitley. And I hoped that where I left off before the commercial break, with that being rushing at you in the Accord, New York bedroom, that you could pick up for the general audience now what your next most vivid memory is after the small being rushed at you, and that it was December 26, 1985.
I looked at the alarm system, no, I had already done that. I'm sorry. It's really confused. The thing I remember most is being carried, and it was a very odd sensation because I didn't feel any physical sense of anything. In other words, I was in motion, but I couldn't do anything about it. But I wasn't. I didn't have any sensation. In other words, if someone was holding me, I had no idea whether they were or not.
Did you have the sense that you were moving in the
Yes,
air?
I did.
And what were you seeing from your perspective in the air wherever you were?
I was moving across the bedroom initially.
And it was horizontal. Well, like, could you see your feet?
Yeah, it was like I was being carried. I thought perhaps I was being carried out the window, but it's hard to know how that could be because the windows were very small. It was just incredibly confusing. I couldn't make any sense of it at all.
And when was the next vivid, like you knew that you were back in some sort of a normal, you could perceive things state?
I wasn't in a normal state. I could perceive things, yes, but I couldn't feel any sensation. My body there was no physical sensation. Initially, later there would be, but at that moment there wasn't. And there was something. There was a feeling of being, as I say, being carried, and then I was in the woods, and I was sitting in the woods with these individuals around me. I mean, I can remember it vividly now. They were small and had what looked like tan or gray bodysuits on and round eyes and a round mouth hole. But the thing is something that happened that isn't in communion. I didn't put it in because at the time I was still grappling with it. And that was that there was somebody there that I knew besides the little creatures that were there. And they seemed like kids. I mean, they seemed like young kids in these uniforms. There was it was a very strange, perplexing experience. One of them seemed feminine. And in any case...
The one you knew, what, was it different than the little ones?
No, it was one of there were two types. I hadn't really, at that point, I don't think I'd really grasped much. I can just remember these uniforms, and I can remember the man who was there. And as I say, he's not mentioned in communion because at the time I couldn't figure out how to explain him. And I was still halfway believing that this was something done to me with drugs. I wasn't sure. But what I knew him. I mean, I recognized him I'd known him for years. I'd known him in school. What I did, in fact, one of the things I pursued most vigorously after this initial event was to try to find him because I thought that a crime had been committed, and since he was the only person I could identify, obviously I should try to find him. And I remember the utter cold horror I felt when I discovered he'd been dead for months when I'd seen him.
Wow.
That was why I didn't put it in communion. I thought he must have been some kind of hallucination or a dream or just some kind of confusion. Only later did I discover that it's quite routine for people to see the dead along with these visitors or whatever they are.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that at the time.
Well, Whitley, this is, I remember talking with Leo Sprinkle and John Mack about exactly their investigations leading them right up to the difficult subject of why is it that there would be some kind of a gray or even, we don't know precisely the difference and we don't know precisely the agendas, but they had identified where there would be some kind of a gray individual both before the birth and at the death of some humans in the abduction syndrome, which is sort of around what you're just describing right now.
Well, yes, it is. And this has got something very profound to do with birth and death. It isn't, and with life itself, it isn't aliens from another planet coming to study us for scientific reasons. I mean, that could be part of it, but something else is going on. And I was very interested in listening to your introduction because there was a sense that I hadn't, of course, at the time, I knew nothing about the Rendlesham Forest incident. And I certainly didn't know until many years later that it had happened exactly a year before what happened to me. And, of course, it has to do with movement through time.
5 years. It was
5 years. I'm sorry. Did I say
right.
a year? I meant 5 years, obviously.
But on exactly December 26th, 5
right.
years apart.
And it's as if there's some kind of link there, the nature of which eludes us. At least it eludes me. And I am not sure what
the cycles of time with...
Yeah, exactly. That maybe it has something to do with the cycles of time. My wife was really very smart about this stuff, Anne, and she always felt like that had something to do with the future and that perhaps a time machine was involved. That was one of the theories that she brought up most often, in fact.
And if there were a time machine, and that relates to perhaps Penniston's download, then the idea that some kind of machinery is involved with advanced intelligences, but the machinery can only be interacted with perhaps in cycles, and that's why there are repetitions around dates, latitudes, and longitudes.
Well, of course, that's total speculation, like most of this. I mean, we just don't know. I do think, though, that we know a certain amount about what time travel would be like, because we have done a few experiments, such as sending a photon back in time. That's a single particle of light, which we can manipulate much more readily than we can other things like this. And we found that it could never be made to intercept itself. In other words, you could do nothing to make the photon destroy itself in the past. Mm-hmm. Couldn't be done. And this means that the grandfather paradox is a real physical effect. That is to say, you can't go back into the past to kill your own grandfather.
But you could generate a new timeline.
Well, that's possible, and that is, I suppose, pretty far beyond where our thought is. What we do know is that because of the principle of least action, because of the grandfather paradox, the principle of least action would not apply to time travel, and therefore it is possible. The principle of least action is essentially, it says that nothing in nature ever does anything other than what it must. In other words, water always seeks the lowest possible point. It never stops and goes up a little bit to take in the view on its way down a hillside. And all of nature is like that. And because we know that the grandfather paradox is operative, we also know that there is no bar to time travel. The only question is how to do it. And that is a huge issue. And here's why. when we see an image of the solar system, schematic of the solar system, what we see is the sun in the middle and circles of which represent all of the planets revolving around it. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is the sun is moving through interstellar space, and the planets are following it, being dragged along by its gravity. So they are not going in circles around it; they are spiraling, and these spirals they're corkscrewing along as the sun moves in whatever mysterious journey it's on. And in order to travel back in time, you must need absolutely exquisite navigation, because you must be able to know where precisely you're going in space, as well as time. In other words, not only must you know where the planet was then, but also exactly where on the planet you want to be. And that is a level of navigational skill that we have never even approached. We've never even thought about it as a need. But perhaps somebody has. And if you think about it, what is happening on this planet right now is fundamental to the future. We are just today, a story has been released that Arctic ice has reached an unprecedented low point for this time of year. It is going to be a very long, hot summer in the Arctic, during which time we are going to experience an unprecedented change, which will change all of our lives as well. And what I'm saying is that this planet is at a moment of absolutely fundamental change. Right. It has done this many times before. It's not new. But the thing that is new, it is now bears billions of intelligent creatures on its surface, all of whom are going to experience the shock of the climax of the interglacial we have been in for the past 15,000 years.
That it's been warming all of this time.
Yes.
And there are time travelers in the far future who have some sort of a survival problem, and they have some vested interest in the evolution of DNA on Earth.
They might want to come back to the place where there was more DNA available, because it's not clear that there will be all that much available in the near future.
That's exactly where I was headed. That the idea that they would come back in the 20th century makes sense given what we are now beginning to experience so intensely in 2016.
Well, yes.
The Earth is changing so much that DNA might be worthless to them further into the 21st century. And that might explain why there was a craft sent into Rendlesham Forest on December 26, 1980. And this also, Whitley, listening, ties into a conversation I had in 1993 in England in a crop formation. It was a man that I met supposedly with friends that had come from the United States. And we end up talking about an extraordinary pattern we were in. And he said to me, I have a friend who works for the CIA, which I have come to understand is translation. I work for the CIA, but I can't say that. So I have a friend who works for the CIA. And I understand that the CIA is studying, photographing, and analyzing photographs of all crop formations possible from satellites because they're looking for a mathematical language. Their hypothesis is that the crop formations are markers for time travelers. trying to make sure that they are going to the right place. And that fits into what you were just saying.
Well, it certainly fits into the fact that a lot of this seems to be happening in the UK. Maybe that's, and yet the abduction phenomenon is not centered in the UK as far as I can tell.
So, well, we know there are different beings. If you, from everything that you've heard over the last 36 years about RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, and knowing John, our host, also on the line, was one of the people affected, the only one affected twice, December 26th and 28th. The second time on the 28th, he was literally seen to be engulfed by red, orange, and blue lights by Adrian Bustinza, who fell to the ground and said that he saw this red, orange light engulf John. And what John cannot remember is he literally has blocked memory on what happened either of those nights. From everything that you've experienced and know, what would you personally think was occurring at Bentwaters? Whether the time traveler hypothesis seems realistic or anything else?
I have no way of answering that. I really am sorry, but I can't even imagine what might have been happening at Bentwaters. I think that I'm not surprised about the loss of memory, or the absence of memory, I should say, because it's more than a loss. It's an absence. Whatever happened, John's brain wasn't working properly, or there would have been some memories imprinted, and there weren't any. So that is, my thought is that that whatever was taking place was very certainly took probably his body outside of any context in which it could record memories. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that's interesting is about the touching of the letters because these letters are not like the kind of language we have at all.
And they aren't letters as much as symbols. They're patterns.
Well, and they're more than symbols even. They're more like hieroglyphics that are in some way active. They're very different from anything that we call language. I mean, we call writing. They really are. That's all I can have to say about them. But and I think that one of the things that happens is when you're placed in such a bizarre, any kind of context that's sufficiently bizarre, you have a lot of trouble with memory. I certainly did and do with the communion experience and with the things that have happened even recently. It's just very, very difficult because when something happens that is outside the context of reality as you understand it, you may or may not be able to construct any kind of idea about it at all. It's really difficult. It's much harder than you would think.
And Whitley, you're exposed to the DI-55 UK Eyes Only, known as the Project Condign Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Report. And there is that F4 annex that has written right into it that Rendlesham Forest is an example of where frequencies that are emitted by UAPs. In the United States, we call them UFOs. England calls them UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, that they emit a radiation, which John and I and Nick Pope and others have learned has something to do with terahertz frequencies, and that it says right in the report that the frequencies emitted by UAPs can manipulate human minds and damage human tissues.
Well, I'm sure they can. I think that they can do more than, well, as far as manipulating minds is concerned, there's no question about that in my mind, speaking of minds. I think that's why we can't know. For example, the descriptions in communion are very vivid, but do they accurately describe what happened? And let's flash forward about a year and a half to 1987, when the book first came out. One of the editors from William Morrow and Company, Bruce Lee, not the same as the martial arts expert, was in a bookstore, the Madison Avenue Bookshop in Manhattan, looking to see what the book looked like, how many books were out and so forth, because it was a big book for them. And as he was getting ready to glance at the book, he noticed that there were two people there reading it. And they were in overcoats and hats pulled down over their eyes. And he further noticed that they were paging through it very quickly and seemed to be laughing about it and saying, well, he got this wrong and he got that wrong. And suddenly they stopped, and they had become aware of his presence. And they looked at him, and they were like the creatures, looked like the creature on the face on the cover of the book. And he was appalled, and at first just was frozen in amazement, and they continued to stare at him. And he left the store. They walked out behind him, laughing and talking. And he watched them walk down Fifth Avenue, these two bizarre forms. Nobody noticed. He watched them until he couldn't see them anymore.
And Whitley would
let me just finish the thought. So obviously, whatever I didn't get everything right either. Who knows what actually happens? We don't.
Right.
We can't tell. The brain isn't capable of I don't think it's capable of stitching these experiences together as really, really accurate memories, because they're just too strange.
Well, do you think that those two in the bookstore were hybrids, human ET hybrids?
You know what I think?
What?
I think that if anybody except Bruce had seen them, and I'm sure people did see them, they would have seen people, not apparent aliens. And I think that there wouldn't have been people there, but that's what they would have seen.
Because it was like a joke. They wanted him to see
they wanted him to see what they were.
Yeah.
But I think they are in absolutely complete control of who sees what about them.
What is your personal opinion today of the differences between what the government calls the pear-shaped headed extraterrestrial biological entities that have gray skin, smaller eyes, and their heads are shaped like pears, versus the grays that the government people I've talked to say they don't trust the grays? They make a distinction between the grays and the ebens, and the grays are the ones with the much more pointed chin, which would be like the one on the cover of Communion.
You know, my impression is that the government doesn't know a darn thing about this, that at least not anything that's at all accurate. I wouldn't trust anything any of them say, inside or out, because I think they're probably just as confused as the rest of us, but have an added layer of expertise that leads them down the garden path of thinking they have figured something out that they haven't. I think a little knowledge can be very dangerous, and that's exactly what they have. I think it's too early to distinguish between species. I don't think that we know whether or not we are seeing here can even be characterized as species or not species, or if they're from another planet or not. And I'll tell you just one of the many reasons why. If this is from the future, then one of the things that might gain them an ability to maneuver in our time greater than they would otherwise have is if they could deceive us into believing that they were something that they aren't. In other words, this might, to a degree, not completely by any means, but to a degree, defeat the grandfather paradox. Because if we think they're aliens and believe they're aliens down into our core, but they're really travelers from the future, then maybe they will have more latitude, more ability to act in our world. I don't know if it works like that or not, but it might, and it's certainly, there is certainly a degree of evidence that it could. So therefore, they may not even look like what we see.
Well, let me flip it around to another thing that comes up in a lot of abductees' stories that I've interviewed, and that is that our government started experimenting with something that they retrieved from one of the crashes in the 40s to the 50s, and they started exploring and experimenting with it in the upper atmosphere. And that provoked other non-humans to become very concerned about what the government was going to do with the development of weapons from what they thought their craft might give us, say, energy devices and positive things, that we started turning everything around into weapons development. And that one particular in-depth interview, it was a woman, and she said, and this provoked the need of the ETs to come back and try to change something in time to divert the misuse of their technology by the U.S. government trying to produce a weapon that would end up harming other species and dimensions. So that would mean we did something in ignorance that caused a huge problem, and then ETs had to come and try to unravel something in time.
This is a primitive tribal species. We're still very tribal, and each tribe is very isolated in itself, and they tend to react violently. We are also not tame, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. We're wild animals. We are social creatures, so we don't think of ourselves as being wild. We have laws, but we are, in fact, wild animals. We've tamed the horses and the chickens and the dogs and the cats. Nobody has ever tamed us to themselves. And so when we are isolated from the social group and placed in a context which is completely foreign to us and under the control of others who are in no way part of the social group, they're not enemies or friends, they're simply outsiders, we react like I reacted, as wild animals. Or they turn us off, and we end up in the state that John Burroughs is in, with no memory whatsoever, because none was ever had a chance to form. But bearing that in mind, I think they probably, if they are beings from another planet, and I don't discount that, I don't think it's impossible at all, then if they are, they must be incredibly wary of us, especially if they come from a context in which this kind of tribalism either no longer exists or never did. If it never existed, they might be completely perplexed by us. They might not understand us at all. And if it once existed and doesn't now, then looking back at their own history, they might understand just how dangerous we actually are. And so two things would happen. First, they would be very wary of any kind of contact with anybody. And second, they would back off to a safe position and begin to use both technological means and means of social control to make certain that we stay on this planet. What happened to the moon? Or what happened to the nuclear rocket programs of the 50s? They were really very promising. We could, if we, at 1G acceleration, you will reach 97% of the speed of light in about 2 years. As you do that, time dilation will decrease the amount of time you perceive as you accelerate continuously. You could get in local or starship time from here to another star system, say 40 or 50 light years away, in just a few years of ship time. In other words, we could be at Zeta Reticuli, which some people are convinced is the origin of some of these beings, in a few years if we had a starship. Do they want that? Maybe not, probably not. And especially if violence does something to the violent, does something to diminish the person who acts violently, they may not want to be in a situation where they have to fight us. They may not want to.
There is this huge paradox then of you and I and others, we have talked a lot about what I was shown at Kirtland Air Force Base on April 9th, 1983, an alleged briefing paper for the President of the United States that said right in black and white, these extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien, and all questions and mysteries about the evolution of Homo sapien on this planet have been answered, and this project is closed. And on top of all of that have been discussions with private whistleblowers saying that there have been at least 3 competing extraterrestrial groups terraforming and manipulating and harvesting this planet for at least 270 million years. That's before the time of the dinosaurs. And if that were true, then whichever one of those groups was responsible for setting in motion the genetic manipulation that would have created Lucy in Africa first and then continued all these different models of standing up primates, they have to know everything about us. They have to have been involved with the actual gene sequencing in our DNA.
Well, if they have been here for a very long time, then certainly there has been genetic intrusion because if we went to another planet and we found creatures on it that were the equivalent of Lucy, of a proto-human, we might very well engage in manipulation to make sure that they eventually came into a state that was acceptable to us in some way. But if that's the case, then they must be in a situation where they are thinking now that maybe they made a mistake.
And what would all this manipulation, Whitley, if this were true, have to do with what John Mack and Leah Sprinkle and you and a few others have been exposed to, the whole repeated description by people in the human abduction that they are with some type of a gray being before they're born, and they are seeing a gray being after they die, and that they have a distinct impression that their very life going in and out of the human body container is related to this vast agenda that is going on with these non-humans.
Well, what about the abductees who turn into grays? I know plenty of those. I know people who have had that happen to them. I know knew a man, he's passed away, who was a massage therapist and was massaging a lady with a very weak heart. And he happened to glance up and see himself in a mirror where he was working on her. She was on her stomach. And he was a gray. He wasn't human. And he thought to himself, my God, if she sees this, it'll kill her. What'll I do? So he kept quietly massaging her, and over time, he gradually turned back into his old self. And after the massage, she said to him, that massage was like a miracle. It went through my whole body. I have never felt anything like it in my life. You get a story like that, and you wonder, we draw all of these conclusions about this thing. It's this group of beings, there's that group of beings, they're from here, they're from there, they're doing this, they're doing that. But if you look closely enough at the responses, or at the narrative of the close encounter experience, it will always take you back to the same place. We don't know. We are face to face with the most provocative question mankind has ever experienced. That's the truth of it. And this briefing paper, God only knows who wrote it or what they thought or what they believed or how they drew their conclusions. But if you look at back 270 million years, that's a long time for anything to exist continuously. I guess it's not impossible, especially if you're a time traveler. Right. You could go back there easily, and you could in fact go across all of time. In fact, if you came here 2 years from now and had the ability to travel across time, you could travel back across the whole of our temporal stream and leave the impression that you'd been here forever, when in fact you just arrived. So you see how tangled this knot is.
Well, and there also is this very strong strain that comes from both the abductees and people who have whistleblowed in the government, that the Greys and or Ebens, but I think they're always talking about the Ebens with the pear-shaped head in this score. They say they are strict environmentalists, and they are very concerned, and were in the 45 when we exploded the first atomic bombs on Earth, and that we did not know that we were tearing into other dimensions, that we were affecting other dimensional life forms, and that the Ebens had to put a stop to it, and that they made it very clear, and I don't know how they made it clear, but it may be along the lines of all the things that Robert Salas has written about in the Minuteman experiences, where the Ebens were not going to allow us, under any circumstances, to explode a nuclear missile because of what they said were the consequences that humans did not understand. And it certainly is true that the above-ground atmospheric tests, both atomic and hydrogen bombs, they came to an end in the 60s.
2 weeks ago, it became known in the West that the Chinese military has recommended to the Chinese government that their 250 warheads, atomic warheads, be taken out of storage and placed on the missiles that would deliver them, presumably to the United States and Japan and other places. No one knows quite why they made that decision, or why they made that recommendation. A few years ago, a Chinese submarine fired a missile off the coast of the United States in sight of Los Angeles and created a great stir here. And it was immediately said that it was just a jet contrail, but it wasn't just a jet contrail. In fact, it was a missile fired in warning because the United States had allowed the Japanese to fire an experimental medium-range ballistic missile on our proving grounds in the southwestern desert the week before, and the Chinese did this in retaliation and warning. Subsequently, to that, the Chinese began to build these artificial islands in the South China Sea, which they have now populated with missiles, medium-range missiles as far as we know, but we can't know for sure, missiles that could immediately, within minutes, affect Japan, the Philippines, and any place in Southeast Asia, and could affect Australia in a slightly longer period of time. In other words, at the present time, China is preparing for a nuclear confrontation. At the same time, North Korea, as we know, last week, placed a satellite in orbit with an intermediate range missile, which could certainly reach Japan. And they will probably or may already have an ICBM that could reach the United States. Iran, at the same time, is in the same situation. So what are we to think? Were they warning us? Are they going to spread their preventive umbrella across the whole world to include Russia, the United States, Iran, North Korea, China? What will they do?
Yeah, will they provoke another round of what happened in the 60s throughout all of the Minuteman bases here in the United States? It was one high strangeness phenomena after another, demonstrating that they would take control of the missiles. And that dramatic incident with that Bob Salas talks about, how they went down every second. There were 10 missiles that were taken offline one by one every second. And Boeing, I interviewed an engineer who had been involved with the construction of the Minuteman missile sites. And he told me, he said, Linda, there was no physical way that there could have been any such taking down a nuclear missile the way they did, 10 every second or few seconds. He said it wasn't physically possible. So it means that the control was from outside those missiles with a technology that we do not understand and do not have. That came from a Boeing engineer to me back in the 80s.
So it happened. And well, what if in 3 or 4 years, we're in this situation? The Arctic has melted, causing a derangement of climate, and the Chinese are starving because of the failure of rice crops in the Far East. The United States is in turmoil because of failure of grain crops here. The Middle East is rioting because of failure of grain crops in the Ukraine. Inevitably, this leads into conflict. If you look back across the history of this species, you will find that conflict and weather patterns coincide. Bad weather patterns, conflict is inevitable.
Well, in this whole nuclear issue, it does go back to the heart of why there may have been a focus on RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in December of 1980, because we now know that there were tactical nuclear missiles on both the Woodbridge and the Bentwaters side. And what we don't know, and it's been suggested by several people that we've had on Phenomena Radio, is that there was a bigger picture that was taking place in the countries around and in Eastern Europe and Russia, and that there may have been something that was going on behind the scenes that the ETs, time travelers, whoever has a vested interest in keeping our genetic material at least healthy enough to harvest for a period of time, wanted to put a stop to something?
Well, they wanted to put a stop to something, but where are they now? What are they? What are they doing now? I mean, it seems to me that this place is going to hell in a handbasket. I don't see them doing anything to stop it.
Well, let's pick that up on the other side of this break. Stand by, Whitley, and we will be back for the second hour of Phenomenon Radio.
Thank you, Linda. That wraps up the first entire hour already with guest Whitley Strieber on Phenomenon Radio. To find the latest on Whitley, log on to both of his websites, whitleystrieber.com or unknowncountry.com. Stay right there as we start hour 2 of tonight's program right after these messages from your choice of UFO Paranormal Talk Radio on the World Wide Web. We're KGRAradio.com.
Hi, I'm Richard Dolan. When I'm not hosting my radio program, The Richard Dolan Show on KGRA, or writing new books on UFOs, I run a publishing company. I'm proud to say that Richard Dolan Press has published some of the most fascinating books available on UFOs and related subjects. They include Dr. Bruce Maccabee's classic analysis of the UFO cover-up, David Marler's breakthrough book on triangular UFOs, Dr. Richard Sauter's unique work on underground bases, and other classics by Grant Cameron, Chase Kletsky, and Dr. Bob Wood, not to mention intriguing works by Eve Lorgan and Laurie MacDonald that deal with truly bizarre phenomena. I'm proud to publish such high-quality and original works, and there are several amazing books about to be released over the next few months. Go to richarddolanpress.com to learn more.
For the thousands of wounded warriors returning from battle, Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps wounded warriors translate their military experience to a civilian job. These extraordinary men and women bring more than just teamwork and inspiration to the workplace. They bring proven world-class job skills. And to ensure proper placement, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right job fit. Talented, skilled, and eager to get back to work, you have the opportunity to hire a seasoned veteran. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
In March of 2012, the Global Radio Alliance joined the digital radio revolution on a mission to give the UFO Paranormal Talk radio listeners a digital option worthy of their time. To seek answers to the greatest mysteries in the history of the world, the KGRA has assembled some of the best authors, researchers, investigators, and journalists on the planet. The world's best UFO historian, Richard Dolan. Emmy award-winning investigative journalist, Moulton Howe, and RAF Woodbridge experiencer John Burroughs on Phenomenon Radio. Paranormal investigator, Chase Kletsky on Fate Magazine Radio. Author and researcher from The Fringe, Micah Hanks. With The Gralien Report, weeknight show anchor Jimmy Church, and Fade to Black. Finding answers to these mysteries is the very fuel that keeps us going. And after 4 years, the KGRA marches on stronger than ever. We are your source for UFO Paranormal Talk Radio, KGRAradio.com.
Now you can share the topics that drive the discussions of your favorite talk shows with TalkStream Live's topic-driven talk radio. List and promote real-time talk radio topics, or post the topics that you want to hear. Hot topics are tweeted and retweeted, and include simple click-to-listen audio links. The future of talk radio is topic-driven talk radio. Available now at TalkStreamLive.com.
Live alternative talk radio in over 125 countries across Mother Earth. KGRAradio.com.
You're listening to the KGRA DB Global Radio Alliance, Van Buren, Arkansas, Sarasota, Florida. And now it's time for the news with Linda Moulton Howe, brought to you by Earthfiles.com. Linda?
A surprising headline appeared in Technology News February 16th, proclaiming, quote, 5-dimensional glass discs can store data for up to 13.8 billion years, close quote. That's the age of this universe. The news came this week from the Optical Engineering Conference in San Francisco, where scientists from the UK's University of Southampton reported, quote, we can guarantee that we have the ability to store the culture, language, and essence of the human race in a simple piece of glass for future civilizations or whatever else is out there. Their new proposed archival method is called 5-dimensional data storage. The recorded disks are only 1 inch in diameter, and information is micron-sized dots stored in nanogratings in glass. Our DNA molecule is 2.5 nanometers in diameter for comparison, so we're down in the microscopic dimension where even a human hair is about 100,000 nanometers wide. And the word nanogratings means storing data in the nano interior of the glass discs rather than bumps on the surface like a regular CD. Data is read from a normal CD by shining a laser at a tiny line that has bumps on it. Whenever the laser hits a bump, light is reflected back and recorded as a 1. Where there is no bump, that's recorded as a 0. That's why standard CDs are considered to be only 2 dimensions of information. Those bumps can be scratched off or damaged in air, heat, and humidity. But this newly described 5D approach involves how light is reflected in 5 different variables, such as the orientation of the nanograting, the strength of the photons stream refracted, and the position of the light stream in an X, Y, and Z axis. The UK scientists told reporters in San Francisco, quote, "We can encode anything. We're not limited. Just give us the file and we can print it onto a glass disc," close quote. 3 extra dimensions of information about the reflected light means much denser storage capacity than current-day optical discs. For example, if you compare disc sizes and how much each disc could hold, a 5D disc, the size of a 128 gigabyte Blu-ray, can store 360 terabytes of information. So the 5D glass disc could store 3,000 times more data than the Blu-ray disc. Glass is also safe up to the temperature of 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit. The scientists say the only thing holding back commercialization for the general public is the high price of the expensive lasers needed to produce the nanoscale data in the 1-inch diameter glass discs. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earthfiles news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com, for more on breaking stories about our universe, the solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news, brought to you by Earthfiles.com. Now back to tonight's interview with very special guest, Whitley Strieber. Linda?
Whitley, where we left off, and you were talking about the worldview right now of where things could be headed politically, that might mean that China, other countries are setting themselves up at least to be we'll say saber rattling, that they haven't taken nuclear war off the table of the geopolitical system of the planet. And the question, would that provoke non-humans to interact?
Well, I don't know. If they're from our future, then they already have perhaps done their interacting as much as they can do, because they extracted an enormous amount of sexual material and DNA from us, and maybe they did that now because this is this is the last chance.
Right.
And maybe the farther back they go in time, and this would certainly fit our understanding of movement through time, the less they can do. Now, I think that countries are posturing the way they are, the big countries, because they know that chaos is coming. For example, this ludicrously named Arab Spring the media was crowing about when it started with these revolutions against the dictators, and everyone was so delighted. And I thought to myself, little do they know what's about to happen. But why did it start? It started because people didn't have food. Why didn't they have food? Because that part of the world depends on a type of bread that is created out of wheat bought from Russia and the Ukraine. And Russia and the Ukraine, due to a drought at that time, a very sharp, very severe drought, cut off exports of wheat. And suddenly the Middle East had no food. And the young man who burned himself to death had been trying to make a little money in order to get food, because food prices had risen so high in Tunisia, and he was arrested and forced to stop, and he became the center, the beginning of a revolution that swept across the Mideast and made it infinitely worse off than it had been before. Dictatorships are ugly, but in societies as profoundly tribally oriented as those societies, it's one choice that can bring a kind of peace. And the result has been that this chaos has not ended. Now think of what it would be like if it was this country, if you couldn't eat, if you were an American citizen living in Dallas or Cincinnati and your children were starving. What would you do? We're angry enough now that we have two outlier candidates, neither of whom have anything remotely resembling practical ideas, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, who are probably going to be the nominees of the two political parties. What would we like under those circumstances? I think that it could be that whoever was here came here, did what they needed to do, and is now backing off in order to let this happen, because I think it's going to.
Meaning the non-humans, even
if they are non-humans, I have very grave doubts about that. I just think that this could be an element of human life that we have really don't understand, and that we also don't really understand that human life is not necessarily entirely located on planet Earth.
But Whitley, if you go back to Psalm 101 and those very early documents that Bob Wood has, and you have Nathan Twining and the Majestic 12 and the people from Truman to Eisenhower, and they are talking about celestial plan forms, extraterrestrials. To me, when you study the documents of history, it is very clear that FDR was dealing with a crash and 3 alien bodies in 1941 on April.
And the assumption being that because they didn't look like us, that they were aliens. But that might not be a correct assumption, especially if they're from the future. If they're from the future, those bodies might have been plant. They might not even be what they appeared to be.
Well, and
that might explain the rumors that I heard from my uncle and from General Exxon, that the bodies consisted of vegetative matter and they didn't even have any organs in them.
These are the androids built to...
Well, unless they aren't androids, unless they are like fakes planted to make us believe in aliens, when in fact it's us doing this.
Well, if you look at the Psalm 101 document with that 1954 War Department stamp on it, and the division, and EBA 1, EBA 2, and one was considered more prime, the other was smaller and was already being categorized in some sort of an android category. And that this does make some sense, because the reports medically that there were chlorophyll, the fluid in the small beings was chlorophyll, and so the hypothesis was that they were using sunlight for energy as opposed to food. and that the prime intelligence, which now we get into the issue of the ebens, the ones with the pear-shaped heads, the grays with the pointed chin, the humanoids that can be brown-haired, blonde-haired, or red-haired, and then the standing-up lizards and alligators, all have been categories described even in government documents, and they would seem to have some relationship to, we'll call it alien species out there. But what about what has been underground on this planet perhaps for 5,000 years or more? Then,
or more.
Yeah. Then you get into the issue of something that has interacted with, terraformed, harvested from Earth for a very long time with the surface life that has been set in motion by non-humans. I'm going to use that word, non-humans, to do work for them, to be used as a genetic pool that they harvest from. And even as Sitchin talked about in the cuneiform, the harvesting of gold from the earth, because gold has to be valuable anywhere in this cosmos.
Well, I don't know, Linda. I mean, these all seem like very, very great flights of fancy to me, not necessarily fantasy. The problem I have always with government documents is that they are written by people who, in general, are very poorly educated in things like cultural history, and especially when you read things that were written by military people with an eye toward, is it dangerous or not, and should we be defending ourselves or not? Of course, if you're a general and you want to get your budget juiced by the president, they're going to be dangerous. You're darn right they're dangerous. But the really the best minds have never even looked at this. That I do know. I'm pretty sure that there was a period of time in which some very good minds addressed it, but they addressed it through the filter of the alien assumption back in the 50s, because they couldn't go any deeper than that. We can go a lot deeper than that now. And I think we all need to step back and really look at what we're seeing and look at ourselves and ask ourselves if perhaps it could be that what is happening is simply outside of any context that we have so far understood, and outside of the context of what these military people and military defense-related scientists may or may not have believed back in the 50s. I don't know, but I do know this. My own experience has been so complex and so oriented towards things that we don't even believe exist, like the soul. We're told the soul doesn't exist by our scientists. And yet not only do I know it exists, but it is involved with an exquisitely subtle and complex and immeasurably powerful technology that is in use all around us that we don't see anymore. We don't understand the world we live in any more than a hamster running in his little cage understands the real significance of the world he lives in a 9-year-old's bedroom.
And Whitley, reinforcing that is that chapter in my book, Glimpses Volume 2, where there are the tube technology. And again, these are the Eben types with the praying mantis, and they are completely focused with urgency about the human soul must stay in containers, human containers, for a certain period of time in order to accomplish something for these non-human grays. And that gets into the question again, why would they be at the before birth and at death or after death in human lives?
It also gets to the question of why certain people can turn into grays from time to time. And what's happening is there is if you are projected into the time stream, all of a sudden everything changes for you. You no longer know the future. This means it comes upon you unexpectedly with all of the power of surprise and gives you a chance in your essence to act from your truth. And you take a huge chance doing this because either it energizes you, because you are acting in such a way that you gain from it, or it doesn't energize you and weighs you down with undigested stuff of various kinds, or whatever it does. It could very well be that that among us are other beings using us as receptacles through which to use to move through the time stream in order to gain this extraordinary energy. And maybe even at the expense of the human soul. I don't know. I have no idea. But my point overall is this, and this is such a critical part of Supernatural, of the book Supernatural, is that we need to take a step back, and three things have to happen. First, we have to face the fact that we don't understand what's going on. And rather than make assumptions or believe the assumptions that were made by the military simply because they were leaked to us, which gives it all an air of importance, which it probably doesn't actually possess. Rather than do those things, let's see if we can't get our own academic and scientific communities to look at this in a new way, to start with things like the bodies of the abductees, the vast literature of close encounter and of sightings, the work of Paul Hill, one of the greatest of all NASA scientists. They tried to prevent his book on his UFO sightings from ever being published, and it was only published because his daughter found the manuscript in his papers.
Right.
And why is it like that? Why suppress this? I can assure you from long experience that anything done behind the closed doors of the secret government is inferior. It is not as good as what would be done and could be done if people like Stephen Hawking were seriously thinking about this. It is absolutely, I can guarantee it. Mm-hmm. And if this ever does come to the surface and we start to read these documents, we're going to think to ourselves, my God, they were keeping this secret not because there was any particular reason to do so, but because they're just damn fools. They don't understand. They didn't understand. And because they didn't understand, they hid.
Whitley. Okay. I caught the flavor of the times right now. X-Files just covered it. Linda's been talking about it. Okay. If in fact there are alien hybrids out there, what's your opinion on how the world would react to that?
Well, I know how I reacted. The one who lived in my woods, badly. As simple as that. Well, because he was something terribly wrong with it.
Well, that's my whole point. I mean, everybody's onto the secret government, the shadow government, and all this other stuff. But what I find interesting is we're not capable of getting along with each other, and yet, as a society, we want to go out into space, number one, instead of taking care of our own business here. And number two, we fight each other over religion. And yet, if all of a sudden the governments of the world admitted there was alien hybrids around, what kind of chaos would that cause?
Well, it's just people start killing each other the same way they did during the witch madness in the Middle Ages, and for the same reason. The truth is, I mean, the man who was living in our woods was very disturbed. He was first he was small. He was, and I've told this story many times. In case there are any listeners who don't know it, I'll tell it very briefly again. This started in about 1992, I believe. I noticed that I kept smelling cigarette smoke when the air was still in the early mornings, and it was odd because the house was quite isolated and there was nobody around who smoked. I tracked this down. I found places in the woods near the house where somebody had been standing and smoking a lot. And I thought to myself, oh, some nincompoop has found us, some crazy person, probably a schizophrenic, because schizophrenics smoke a lot. Because some of them do, because it relieves some of the symptoms of schizophrenia. Nicotine does. And I began to look around, and I found this, what looked to me like a little boy sitting in the woods smoking. And I went up to him to tell him to stop smoking because the woods were very dry. It was August. It was very dry. And as I drew near him, it became obvious that there was not a little boy, that it was something else. And I wasn't at all sure of what I was dealing with. It was a very strange apparition, humanoid, but not human enough to really convince me that I shouldn't run like hell, which is what I did. And he continued to come around the house a lot. And Ann and I went skinny dipping one evening, and he ran back and forth in the woods behind the house, there was a wall of foliage, so we couldn't see him, but you hear him gasping and breaking sticks and going on. And so we went back in and we realized he's trying to protect us. He's guarding us. This is a guard. We lost the cabin, and the next October we moved to Texas to a little condominium and arrived there with about $20 in our pockets. And lo and behold, a few days after we arrived, he shows up. He's hiding in a little cul-de-sac right beside our bedroom, standing a few inches from my head, but on the other side, smoking like a chimney still. So then I discover that other people in the condo complex have noticed him because he does things like climb walls, get onto people's upstairs balconies and rip spokes out of their bicycle tires. And one man saw him jump off of a balcony into a swimming pool, which was impossible. He leaped up like a frog or a grasshopper he didn't run, in other words. Huh. And so they called social services, and state social services are looking around in there. And then these two horrifying men were living in the condo immediately behind ours, and he appeared to be connected to them in some way. So I tracked down the owner of that condo and talked to him, and he said, no one's living there. I said, yes, there are at least 2 and probably 3 people living there. And so he had them evicted, and they went around trying to sell his furniture to everyone else in the condo complex, all of whom knew they didn't own it. And the little short one sat on our balcony, on our steps one time, and he could not bear to have me approach him. Eventually, when their position there became untenable, the last I saw of him, the 2 men, I don't know what happened to him, but the last I saw of him, he went marching off down the middle of the street and was never seen again. In other words, something was terribly wrong with all 3 of these people. And I'll tell you another thing. Ann and I came back we used to walk at like 2 o'clock in the morning because it's so darn hot you couldn't walk in Texas during the day. And we came back from a walk, and we were crossing a little hill, and below us was a strip mall. And there was someone standing in the strip mall making a bum sign on a door of a Rite Aid or something. And we literally were stopped like by a wall of evil. This was the most terrifying individual. He just exuded evil. We stepped back into the dark and into the dark neighborhood and went way around another way and got home and got in, and were very grateful to get our doors locked. And he was one of the men living in that flat right behind us. It was so strange, and it's much stranger even than this. It goes more deeper into strangeness. That my answer is, obviously, if the world was told there were alien human hybrids around and they were like these people, there'd be big trouble.
But Whitley, it's already happening. Barbara Lamb has a new book out called Meet the Hybrids. The people don't sound deranged in her book, and it's a sampling clearly through Barbara Lamb, but other people who are investigators of the human abduction syndrome. They are dealing with a lot of people now who are saying that they have consciousness that they're human ET hybrids. One of the common denominator questions is if there are people now who feel that, say that, think that, dream that, then what about DNA proof? Would there be a possibility of proving that somebody was a human ET hybrid? But something has shifted. This is now the subject that is beginning to take over in all discussions.
Well, I think that small person, I think it's pretty likely that if you did a DNA test on him, you would find something unusual or something unknown. But my guess is that if you do DNA tests on most of these people who believe that they're hybrids, you're not going to find a thing, because I don't think it has much to do with DNA. I think it conceivably could, but DNA is a marker that we understand, but there may be other things about the body and the soul that have to do with the formation of the human being that we don't understand and can't measure, and that might be where you would find the real differences. This is just a guess.
Do you know Tom Valone from the Integrity Research Institute?
No.
Hey, Linda Whitley, can we hold that thought there because we're due for our last break?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Whitley. To find out the latest on Phenomenon Radio, log on to the website at phenomenonradio.com. And for the latest in science, the environment, and real X-Files, visit the award-winning website Earthfiles.com with over 2,000 in-depth reports that go way beyond the 6 o'clock news. That's Earthfiles.com. We will be right back with the final segment of tonight's program on the best alternative talk radio on the internet, KGRAradio.com. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio, live.
Around the world for decades have come high strangeness reports of mysterious aerial lights, beams, animal mutilations, human abductions, secret space and military programs focused on an alien presence. One reporter of these Earth mysteries is Emmy Award-winning TV producer, writer, and editor Linda Moulton Howe. She reports and edits the science, environment, and real X-Files news website, Earthfiles.com.
We are moving from the paradigm that we are alone in the universe to a new one in which we are not alone. And something out there is interacting with us, our animals and plant life, forcing glimpses of other realities upon us.
Linda has produced 4 large books about these phenomena with hundreds of color images and illustrations that reviewers such as New York Times best-selling author Jim Marrs describes as an amazing accumulation of evidence. All her books, An Alien Harvest, the 2-volume Glimpses of Other Realities, and Mysterious Lights and Crop Circles, along with documentaries, are available in the shop at Earthfiles.com.
At MSC Cruises, we believe life should be measured in moments, not minutes. The moment you set eyes on the perfect blue of the Caribbean, the moment you breathe in the sweet, salty air of freedom, the moment you let out the sound of true happiness. Find your moments aboard one of the newest members of our fleet. Introducing MSC Divina, now sailing the Caribbean year-round from Miami. Contact your travel advisor or visit msccruises.com today.
Call Holiday Maker Travel toll-free at 877-642-4308. Check out their website at holidaymakertravel.com or email them at info@holidaymakertravel.com to reserve your MSC cruise today.
Hey, everybody, this is Warren.
And Jason from the best vape shop in Ogden, the Vapor Vault.
And this is Nate from Tremonton's only vape shop, HPS, powered by the Vapor Vault. That's right, Utah's best-selling e-liquid Dragon Juice is now available in Tremonton.
And we have everything a vapor needs.
From starter kits to full authentic custom mechanical mods. Also, come try Black Dragon, our brand new line of dripper juice.
Made especially for RDAs.
So join the vaping revolution at the Vapor Vault.
Just west of Wall by the Newgate Mall.
And at 17 North Tremont Street in Tremonton.
You read about UFOs, strange creatures, and ghosts. You watch videos about them. Do you know how to investigate them? Chase Kletsky does. For 20 years, she's been Indiana Jones and Laura Croft rolled into one. The real hunter of Bigfoot, ghosts, and UFOs. She goes everywhere, from remote woods to ghost-infested buildings to the highlands of South America, hunting down strange things in our world. Now she's written a book to show you how it's done. Co-authored with UFO researcher Richard Dolan, Chase lays it out. How to prepare, what to bring, interviewing witnesses, doing a stakeout, handling evidence, and documenting it the right way. Get Admissible, the field manual for investigating UFOs, paranormal activity, and strange creatures. Learn more at richarddolanpress.com.
Also available on Kindle.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk.
Yes, there have been crash retrievals of UFOs, and we have to really hunt, we have to research, we have to do our work really well.
Always has been, always will be. KGRA, the planet.
Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio and the final segment of the program with tonight's special guest, Whitley Strieber. Here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Race. Whitley, before the break, I was raising some new research that appears to be going beyond looking at DNA as a molecule that is necessary for the splitting of cells and life, but that DNA itself could be used perhaps by extraterrestrials, other life forms, to encode information for some sort of a tracking reason or agendas unknown, and then information extracted separate from the splitting of cells for life. Have you ever been exposed to that concept anywhere in all of the experiences you've had?
No, not at all from my engagements of various kinds with the visitors. As far as tracking is concerned, somehow or another, I don't think that's it. I can't believe they're going to be interested in, who's going to go to Walmart today or not, and making records of that. It's something else, believe me. But, we were talking earlier about the whole issue of hybrids, and I had a very interesting thing happen to me quite a few years ago. Ann and I and our son were living in Brooklyn. He was a young teenager then. We were living in Brooklyn Heights in a house that was from my office windows. I could see what it was still there then, the World Trade Center across the harbor. We were right near the water, right near the promenade as it's called, in Brooklyn Heights. And I had been having a lot of difficulty with a Senate Select Intelligence Committee who were trying to use me to formulate questions to ask certain intelligence agencies in order to try to get the senators some more information about various things. And
related to ETs or something else?
No, to ETs. And I was told by one of the staffers that the National Security Agency had a station in the top of the World Trade Center from which they could read everything that was being typed on my computer, because they had extremely sensitive equipment and could pick up the tiny radio frequencies coming out of the keyboard, which I found very invasive and very unpleasant to even know about. So I mentioned this to my family over dinner, and my son said, "Why don't you play a joke on him and tell him you're an alien and tell him to watch out?" And it struck me as a pretty stupid idea. But oddly enough, the next morning it occurred to me that maybe I will write them a letter. And so I did. I wrote this out, and I showed it to my son, and we got a good laugh over it. I didn't send it to anybody. I just erased it. The next day, our little street, Grace Court, dead-ended in the promenade, was filled with mysterious cars, all of them with individuals sitting behind the steering wheel staring straight ahead. So I telephoned a detective I knew and gave him some of the license numbers. And he said, I don't even need to run those. Those are federal cars. They register all those cars in Ulster County. That's what they are. So I called the staffer at the Senate and said this had happened and told him what I'd done. And he laughed and he said, well, you shouldn't have done that, because that is the one thing we fear the most, is having aliens who appear to be human involved here in any way, and especially in any way in our government. And he said, I'll get rid of them. They'll leave in 15 minutes. And they did. But we talk about alien-human hybrids. If you think you are one, I sure as hell wouldn't let anybody know.
Well, it sounds exactly like what the AFOSI agent Richard Doty said to me on April 9th, 1983, after showing me the alleged briefing paper and then walking me out of the AFOSI office to my car because everything had to be so secure. And as we were walking, he said, I've never forgotten it, because I was brand new to the whole idea of government interacting with, collaborating with ETs. He said, our government's greatest concern is who walks around on this planet and looks human but is not.
Well, I can understand the concern given the way the ones I have encountered were. But I still think that it would be very nice if somebody came clean about this. And even if they don't have it right, if they would at least come clean about it so that our best minds would take a look at it, because they haven't. Our best minds have never looked at this. And I mean not just in the scientific community, but in the academic and intellectual cultures as well. Nobody who can think really, really well and think very complex thoughts looks at this. They all think it's nonsense because they've been the victims of social engineering, and they're arrogant and self-proud of themselves as what they are, and they're easily victimized by social engineering of various kinds. And so we don't have good answers yet, is my instinct. I could be wrong. Maybe the answers that have been leaked to us at various times are actually good answers. And I was reading the other day this lunatic thing, seemingly, about the size of the hidden government and the breakaway civilization and these battleships that had been built in space by NASA and things. And I thought, how crazy is this? But is it totally crazy? Because I'm sitting here with an implant in my ear, which is an extremely sophisticated thing. It's not even a device. It's something else.
And it was put in you by something that looks like a gray.
No, it was put in by two people. There was something else in the room, maybe. And when you read my descriptions of what happened, I'm not sure what else was there. There may have been nothing but the two people. But in any case, they were people. And not only were they people, when I opened my eyes and became awake, a human voice from the outside, a male voice, said, "Condition red." And meaning that somebody was out there who was monitoring my state of consciousness. And when I woke up, he said in the clear, he said, "Condition red." And then the two people rushed into the room and did their thing on me and put the implant in without leaving any opening or scar tissue of any kind.
And isn't it in a place where you cannot get it out surgically?
Well, we tried to get it out surgically, and we learned two things. First, it can move, and it moved down from the top of my ear into my earlobe on its own, out from under the surgeon's scalpel. And two, we got a little chip of it. And this chip of the thing consisted of a metallic base with living proteinaceous cilia coming out of it. In other words, it was alive, a living thing that was also partly technology.
Right. And it sounds
we don't
like
build things like that. You can't buy that from Apple.
And it sounds like an implant case. A year and a half ago in Toronto, I worked on it, where exactly the same description, that the implant moved. And then there was another case in the Midwest having to do with an animal and an animal mutilation, and that the investigator said that when they got to the scene of the animal, they could see a small green light coming off of something on, I believe it was a calf. And then they realized that the green light or something was moving, and it was moving as if burrowing itself into the calf. And the man who called and told me about it said he was able to get a knife and try to go after this thing, and it kept burrowing into the dead calf's tissue away from his knife. He said it was the eeriest thing he's ever experienced.
Well, exactly. And it because it's a living being. It's not, it's a you talk of human alien hybrids. How about a living machine hybrid?
Yeah. Well, androids, by definition, would be made to do work for something, programmed for specific work, but they would act as independent agents, androids. Small or large. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you were talking earlier in the program about the current geopolitical problems and the fact that we are in a warming planet and that the future could become very, very rocky.
It will become rocky. It's going to happen.
Right. Why do you think that someone in this government wants to get a public face of humans from the United States on Mars?
Well, perhaps one of the reasons is there's not going to be many people here soon.
Or that
if we don't build a self-sustaining colony on Mars, and remember what we could do with a self-sustaining colony on Mars. We can't build a self-sustaining colony on the moon because it's always going to run out of something. But if we could build one on Mars, we could take with us not only a sufficient number of human beings to eventually reconstitute the species, but they could take all of our knowledge with them. They could take all of our knowledge with them because we can now compress that knowledge into digital format and make it very transportable, all of it.
And we got these little glass things that could last for the age of the universe and compact so much information in only 1-inch discs that we could take everything to Mars.
So we could make it could be a refuge from which the human species could be reconstituted. And maybe that would be the second time this has happened.
Well, what if we already have military installations in lava tubes on Mars, as I have been told, all the way back from 1978, in collaboration with some sort of an alien presence, and that all of this time it has been a charade that we would have to, in the future, plan some sort of a travel to Mars. But in fact, we've had an installation there. And now that this is the effort to finally get enough of an inertia going to Mars that eventually the two will meet and nobody will know. It would be like a segue in music. That which has been there and that which is coming will segue and no one will ever know.
Well, it's always frustrating to me to think that there might be people flitting around the solar system and even beyond, and the equivalent of space-going Ferraris, while the rest of us have got to put immense amounts of our wealth into what amount to rowboats to nowhere, going slowly to places like the moon and Mars and barely sustaining on the journey, that somebody is far ahead of us. There can only be one conclusion if that's true, and if people like Richard Dolan are correct about the breakaway civilization, and that is they want us to fail. They have isolated themselves from us so that those of us who are stuck here on planet Earth for whatever reason will go through the whole catastrophe, possibly leading to the complete extinction of the species in this context, or the near extinction of this species. And remember, if that's the case, then they did it. We did not do it. Because if we're genetically engineered, then whoever genetically engineered us genetically engineered out sexual seasonality, genetically engineered in prominent genitals and a lack of hair, body hair, causing us to become sexually extremely active at all times of the year, and leading inevitably to the Malthusian overgrowth of population that we have experienced now. They would have, if this was done by somebody, they would have known from the day they started what would happen. And why did they do it then? Only to enjoy our destruction? Are we therefore a sort of entertainment, like a massive planetary gladiatorial contest, or some unholy, bigger than life, realer than real action movie? What are we?
And the implication is that if there is a breakaway, say, military outpost on Mars in a lava tube, and it's been there since 1978, that it would have been anticipating all of the agitation that would grow on Earth as the population kept increasing exponentially, and that we would get to a point where humans would self-destruct, and then those that were isolated on Mars or wherever they are would come back and reclaim Earth and start over a completely new civilization.
Exactly. That would be what it must be about. And I just hope that they took somebody other than military people, because I have never met military people who I thought had the capability of doing something like that. Many of them are wonderful people, but this is not their brief. Rebuilding a civilization is not their brief. It's a different brief. If anybody, they should bring people with knowledge of the culture, with a deep understanding of what human beings are. But above all, speaking of genetic engineering, we need to be rejiggered so that we don't simply repeat this over the next 2,000 or 3,000 years and end up where we are now again, with a heavily overburdened planet and another catastrophe as we go across the top of the bell curve and go sliding down to perdition on the far side.
Well, and Whitley, that goes right to the heart of the issue of cycles of time. I'm remembering several abductions over the last 20 or 30 years when I've interviewed people, and they have said that they have somehow been shown or learned something from their abductors about the fact that things keep repeating on Earth in cycles of time because of something that has happened in the timeline, and that the Ebens anyway, are concerned about the cycles of time that keep repeating catastrophes, and that they are trying to change the timeline so that Earth will be freed from cycles of catastrophe. Have you ever encountered any information like that?
Well, yes and no. Yes, I have encountered information like that. No, it wasn't quite like that. Let me tell you what I did encounter. I received a letter from a lady who had been walking in the woods with her son. And she wrote me because of my description of the little blue creatures in communion. And she said in her letter, a creature like that had come out of a cave that they were passing in the forest, and said he was a rebel and that he wanted to tell her the truth. And the truth was that many thousands of years ago, there existed on both Earth and Mars advanced civilizations, and we had had a war. We had denuded Mars and stripped it of all life, but they had captured our souls and imprisoned our souls in a perpetual wheel of a cycle of living and dying, being born, dying, and then being born again and dying, and that we would never escape from this, not as long as Earth existed. And they called their name in their language for Earth was dead forever. Now, that story was a bit chilling, as you may imagine. And of course, at the time, I had been just exposed to the face on Mars, and the Viking orbiter images of that and the pyramid and the D&M pyramid and so forth, and had financed some very sophisticated work done on those images by Mark Carlotto, who also at that time did imaging for some government intelligence agencies. And so I was very disturbed by this story. Is it a true story, though? Well, that's another question. And as I have gotten deeper and deeper into this over the years, I have come to understand that there is truth and there is truth. And what we must not do is to take any of this as fact. What we need to understand is there is another way of thinking about things like this that is crucially and fundamentally indeterminate. Where we seek logic, this universe answers with indeterminate responses. That's why we have these strange events happening at the quantum level, where if you direct your attention to a photon, it becomes a particle. Otherwise, it remains in a wave form, in a nascent form. And this is also true of thought. We have not understood this yet, but it's why our philosophers can never come to a final answer. There isn't one. There isn't a final answer. All there are tendencies. And unless we see this whole vast, unimaginably complex array of events, experiences, descriptions, and whatnot, some materials even, like what Roger Lear found and what's in my ear, unless we see that through the eyes of an indeterminate mind and we don't pin it down, we really probably don't see it at all.
Well, Whitley, that's deep. On that note, we're out of time. I wanted to take the time to tell you thanks for coming on tonight. It was a very interesting show.
Well, you're welcome. And folks, do buy Supernatural. Remember, it's out there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. For John Burroughs, for Linda Moulton Howe, and for our very special guest, thank you, Whitley Strieber. Thank you all